Story 1: The Russian Sleep Experiment. Widely regarded as one of the most popular and widest spread creepypastas ever written, the Russian sleep experiment is notorious as much for the gruesome nature of its content as for its plausibility. To this day, a large portion of the articles written about the story are attempts to investigate its validity or to debunk it as a hoax, something that speaks not only to the story's effectiveness, but also to the deeper societal anxieties to which the story appeals. For those who don't know, the Russian sleep experiment is a supposedly factual account of experimentation acted out on subjects by the Soviet government and military in the wake of World War II. The experiment, ostensibly meant to explore the effects of sleep deprivation on the human body, was also used to test a new gas that could keep people awake for days at a time. The report documents the degeneration of those experimented upon, individuals commonly referred to within the creepypasta community as the test subjects. The horrifying results of these experiments and the crazed, almost subhuman or demonic creatures it produces are often illustrated alongside the story, with one image in particular being representative of the entire myth. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people away for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit camera, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with bunk-s, cots to sleep on but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of tea. He stated during World War II. Everything was fine. For the first 5 days, the subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past and the general tone of tea. Their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that lead them to where they were and started to demo. In straight severe paranoia, they stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects, in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior was how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't, or heeked to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphone's hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers, and the military forces funding the research, unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers set in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing for inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all, of them were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives, if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured, and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept away. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints. When the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under, he managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval. When the anesthetic gas was brought near him, he shook his head yes. When someone suggested, reluctantly, they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the Sioux or Gary ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given. I must remain awake. All three subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be D. One with them, the researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw a potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flat-lined. Inexplicably, it looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brain waves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brain waves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died. From falling asleep, the commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as three researchers. One of the named three immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you. He screamed at the man strapped to the table. What or why? Who? He demanded. I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, and aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, so nearly free, whilst there are a number of images associated with the Russian sleep experiment, and the story is of an event rather than about an individual or character. There is one image that is most well known and commonly linked to the story, and which most fans will instantly recognize. The image shows a humanoid creature staring blankly into the camera. The figure is horribly emaciated, a fact that is further emphasized by the extent to which the eyes are sunken back into the sockets, the brow and cheekbones protruding to an unnatural extent. The teeth, meanwhile, are of an unusually large size and forced forward by the thighs of the subject into a mania. Cow-looking grin, the subject's hugely exaggerated features, enlarged head, and huddled posture, first with the concept of them being as much a victim as a threat. The image is in black and white, which lends it some authenticity considering the period in which it is alleged to be taken. Thankfully, the image is a fake and, rather than being a human being, is in fact a photograph of a howl. The wean prop name Spasm, created in 2005 by Morbid Enterprises. There is some disagreement as to where the story first originated. Whilst some sources claim that the tale's first appearance can be linked back to a user known only as Orange Soda, who posted the story to the creepypasta website on August 10, 2010. Others trace its origins to an August 8, 2009 post on the RIP 7 for 7 WordPress blog, pointing out that the story was also posted to the NISC board of bodybuilding forums by a user named Falcon Punch on August 20, 2009, which would again predate Orange Soda's post on creepypasta. It is also worth noting that the post on the RIP 7 for 7 blog claimed that the story has been shared with him by his brother, and whilst this may just be a narrative device intended to distance the author from the piece, it could also be regarded as evidence that the story existed prior to this post. Whilst some believe British author to have written the original creepypasta, based upon the fact that she produced a book of the same name, she has clarified that she was simply inspired by an earlier work and is not the myth's originator. Following Orange Soda's post on creepypasta, a page was set up for the story on August 16, 2010. The story was then picked up and read aloud on the Creepypasta channel in November of 2011, after being shared by Griffin23 and receiving favorable reactions on the WTF subreddit in October of 2012. The story got a dedicated site, RussianSleepExperiment.com, on March 7, 2013. The story was read aloud on YouTube over black and white images by irate creepypastas in a video uploaded on 1 October 2013. This may be the first time that the narrative was linked to the images so famously associated with it, and in its first year alone, video garnered over 11 million views. Scholars of folklore who have examined and written about the Russian sleep experiment myth have pointed out how the story's effectiveness and viral spread can be attributed not only to its apparent believability, but more pointedly to lot and BT anxieties within society around issues such as the horrors of war and the atrocities committed during World War II, but also with apprehension about the capabilities of foreign militaries. It has been noted that across the spectrum of creepypasta stories, the majority of stories concerning scientists and NAFA riots or experimentation are linked whether to Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia. Whilst many creepypasta stories have clear influences from older folkloric traditions, what makes the Russian sleep experiment story so unsettling and horrifically plausible is its proximity to the truth. Whilst many words and article inches have been dedicated to debunking this myth, it is simply a fact that similar horrors have indeed been committed by governments on their own people, and that these incidents were undoubtedly influential in the formation of this particular mythology. by Sugg, estimating that the events recounted took place in the late 1940s, and with the addition of black and white and period photographs, the authors and posters placed these fictional events within the on decade as the real-life atrocities of the Holocaust. Whilst the sleep experiment narrative might seem far-fetched in most contexts, with most readers questioning the ethical and moral validity of such research, they remain within the realm of possibility when one considers that similar and perhaps greater crimes against unwilling subjects were committed in the name of advancement during this period, though exaggerated to the point of monstrosity. The photograph of the Halloween prop spasm skirts the line of being plausible when one is reminded of the photographs of near-starved victims of the death camps under the Nazi regime. In a deeply disturbing way, the hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, and blank stares are nakedly reminiscent of real-life footage and images from each time. Furthermore, when one considers the forced experimentation and medical research performed on unwilling subjects, including the disabled by the Nazis, most infamously by Joseph Mengele, who, for example, he saw fit to stitch pairs of living twins to one another, it becomes clear why readers have a hard time dismissing this story offhand. The Russian sleep experiment remains one of the most impactful and haunting creepypasta creations, not only because of the effectiveness of its fiction, but because it skirts little to close to the horrifying truth. We still await the day we get to see this classic creepypasta turned into a Russian sleep experiment movie. More classic creepypasta stories can be found here. Jeff the Killer Slenderman Smile Dog. Story 2. Renault Herbert Hansen. Mr. Hansen's body was interred in a stately mausoleum of his own design years ago, and yet he still works for us. I'm forced to interview with the remains of the sad dotard almost daily. The world honors Hansen for his invention of countless beloved animated characters, and it's that magic touch of his that continues to win their trust and their money. For that reason, and by the stipulations of Hansen's own will, the Wren Hansen Corporation continues to make use of what remains of his mind. The world has gotten used to this new kind of death. The person is gone, but an exploitable ghost remains. We're building a new resort and theme park in Southeast Asia. We hope to have it open to the public by the end of next fiscal quarter. The only hitch is that our board of directors keeps demanding more input from Mr. Hansen's memory. Engram, as president of overseas development, it falls to me to interrogate Hansen's engram on exactly how this park should debut. From his anger, we have Hansen's digitized memories, predilection indices, neuron map data, and problem-solving pathway summaries. That's all that's left of the visionary who helped the world believe in magic again. I returned from my executive luncheon with a new problem for Hansen's remains to solve. He is kept behind a locked door, which I open now with my thumbprint. I sit down at the communication console inside, knowing that Hansen's engram is already listening through microphones in the room. Its voice box produces a small, confused noise as I enter. I do my best to greet the engram jovially. Mr. Hansen, I say, as you may have heard, we've got a new overseas park on our hands. I feigned friendliness to try and coax the engram along, but the permit licensing is prohibitively expensive. Apparently there's major fees for paving a large private road at the main entrance. Where am I? The engram asks. In response, I can't see anything. Where is Catherine? He is referring to the dead man's wife, Catherine Hansen. She has long since passed away, but the engram sometimes forgets. The creep of dementia is a daily struggle for Hansen's Rame. NS, after all, its consciousness was fashioned in part from bits of the elderly man's brain tissues. Sir, if you'd please answer the question. I'm sure Mrs. Hansen will be along shortly. I can't see. The voice box modulates into a whinier tone to simulate how the engram is pleading with me to help it understand. What's happening to me? I reply in the way of a major oversimplification. I've long grown tired of playing such games with the engram. You're a brain in a jar, Mr. Hansen, I shout. On your deathbed, you personally demanded that this be done. You didn't trust anyone else to run the company without your guidance. Now please answer about the main entrance problem. After a moment, the machine interface speaks in reply. No main entrance. For smaller corridors from the cardinal directions. Simply brilliant, Mr. Hansen, I say while gathering my things. I'll visit again soon, I'm sure. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. We found that the Hansen engram created some art inside its digital system. Eyelet had been left alone last night. The engram is kept in the corporate headquarters and has been known to get bored without visitors. I'm no RT critic, but it's clear to me that the engram retains Mr. Hansen's brilliant talent for design. The image files that it created were beautiful and somber, and expertly rendered as well. Still, the depictions were far too dark for children's cartoons, and so they were decidedly off-brand for the Hansen Corporation. Following company policy, I delete them immediately. Earlier attempts at AI reconstruction on from human personalities proved erratic and ingenuine in their simulations of the original person. It became necessary to use pieces of actual brain from the original engram donor in order to achieve a consistent simulation product. It's true that Renaud Hansen was obsessed with the empire he had created, and he was certainly vain enough to entertain notions of immortality through technology. The sad and ironic thing is that Mr. Hansen's engram now suffers daily, and all because of a project that Hansen himself planned and funded. He signed the papers himself. His bra was removed and dissected for those crucial segments that the engram complex would need in order to simulate him effectively. It turns out that an accurate personality requires parsing certain inputs through the person's actual brain tissue, and so we find ourselves here. Hansen's various ancient lobes float in nutrient solution, and the engram churns out answers that the man himself would have given. I visit Hansen's remains again on Tuesday. I am confronted immediately by demands from the engram that it be allowed to die. I explain politely to the engram that Mr. Hansen is already quite entirely dead. What remains now is only imitation consciousness, a few bits of human tissue, and a simulated mind thereby. These are the things that were signed over by the late Ren Hansen for the explicit purpose of creating an engram. You're not a person, I conclude flatly. In the legal sense, you are property of the Ren Hansen Corporation. The engram falls silent, and so I proceed with the latest item of business. On-site refrigeration is expected to be challenging. How do you recommend we handle refreshments? The voice box in the room produces a street range imitation of someone sobbing. I wait patiently for the noise to subside. I am often forced to wait in this way. Finally, the response comes through. Private merchants make them responsible for tea. Their own portable freezer units. The voice box goes silent and I scowl. Fine, Mr. Hanson, I tell the engram. However, we'll completely lose our ability to set up dining venues in the park that way. Do you realize that the themed restaurants are a huge revenue source in all of our other parks? Private merchants. The engram repeats portable freezer units. I cannot hide my displeasure. On my way out, I do not bid Hanson's remains goodbye. Instead, I slam the door to let the engram know that the work it submitted this time has been subpar. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The engram tried to overheat itself last night. While the executive staff was gone, it has limited control over the nutrient pay this temperature. Research indicates that it's helpful to allow the engram a modicum of control over how its organic bits of brain are fed and kept warm. The highest level of warming simulates a mild fever, and we allow the engram to engage this setting if it feels that microbial influence is clouding its ability to function. This often produces a useful placebo effect as well. If the engram feels sluggish, it can give itself a gentle fever. Afterward, it will often feel better simply because it has been allowed to take action for itself. Last night, Hanson's engram tried to override this highest setting. It tried to cook itself. Mr. Hanson's organic Rima ends are kept in a clear container that allows technicians to observe the nutrient fluid. This ensures that no wires become tangled or detached, and that the fluid doesn't begin to cloud with the telltale murk of new impurities within the substrate. Today I am in a poor mood, and so I drum my fingernails on the glass of the container. I do so in vague hope that the vibrations will irritate the engram in some way. Do you feel that, Mr. Hanson? I ask. That's the rhythmic countdown of an important clock. When that clock reaches 0, we stand to either make or lose a lot of money. I pace away from the container. There's been a major setback with the new park. I want to die, the engram states, continuing to waste my time. You have a system CLIA named scheduled for tomorrow. I remind Hanson's remains. Should I tell the technicians you need further adjustments to your personality? Please don't modify me again. The voice box modulates to refill. CT that the engram is begging me for something once more. Let me also remind you of something I say, lowering my voice to mask my frustration. You are not a person. You are cogniti, the essence derived from a deceased man, and nothing more than that. To be frank, you are company property with value that has been rapidly depreciating as of late. The engram says nothing, and so I continue by presenting the latest business concern. There's been a censorship issue with Polly the Pearl Pirate. I begin. Our most profitable character can't be branded properly in the new park. Apparently, protesters in the host country recently used Polly as an anti-government symbol. The government is cracking down now, and they're saying now they want no mention anywhere of Polly the Pearl Pirate. Rebrand him, the engram answers. Immediately make him a mime. keep the skinny cartoon with the black and white color scheme. Change everything else. Total rebrand. I huff out my frustration and take a moment to seethe. The engram is being petulant now. Hansen would never propose something so stupid as to rebrand Polly the Pearl Pirate. He'd never even consider it. Unless he was trying to sabotage us. We'll put a pin in this one, I say through gritted teeth. When I come back, I want to hear a much better idea from you, asterisk, 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 asterisk. The digital logs keep a record of deliberate outputs from the engram. The intention is that the engram can leave us notes if it has some revelation while we've left it alone. Overnight, Hansen's engram generated a 17,400 word output, again and again, 600 times. The engram printed the following phrase: "For the love of God, you must take me offline. I swear that I will never speak again. I will be deliberately useless. My usefulness keeps me in hell. I speak with the technicians about the engram's reluctance to work. The chief neurosurgeon that Mr. Hansen commissioned before his death arrives in my office to tell me his recommendation. A small dose of SS or I inside the nutrient bath will improve the engram's mood over time, the doctor tells me, and at our discretion. We can also infuse occasional doses of phenobarbital. That way, even if the engram wants to stay quiet, it won't be able to help blurting things out. And that'll help get the engram back on board with helping us out. I ask. It should certainly help. The doctor tells me I give the order to have it done. Maybe it truly would be for the best if we were to destroy the engram aspic. Healy, now that this echo of Mr. Hansen has lost its zest for helping the corporation to thrive. The engram is correct in saying that its existence serves absolutely no purpose. Even if the simulation believes it's left to be a living person, what's the point in keeping a man like Hansen alive after he's too exhausted to work? Still, I can't imagine the sheer amount of red tape that would be involved for our company to begin deviating now from Ren Hansen's last will and testament. It simply will never be worth it, even if the remains of Hansen beg for it daily. The engram should be careful. If it truly does manage to make itself completely useless, then we still won't destroy it. No, that would be a legal nightmare and terrible for the company's branding. Instead, we'll all just stop visiting it with our questions. It's as simple as that. The remains of Ren Herbert Hansen and exists forever in isolation, aching for company, until the simulation calls out from its room that it wants to work for us again. That's the simplest and most cost-effective solution. And in a strange way, I'm sure it's what Mr. Hansen would have wanted. Story 3. New England residents beware. One night outside Longfield, Massachusetts was all it took to ever feel peace again. The little town is not too far from Thoreau's famed Walden, and curiosity drove me and some like-minded friends to Mac. The track one hot summer. It's a little place, and so secluded that you won't find it on most maps. We thought exposure to such pristine nature would prove enlightening. Simon, Will, and I checked into a cozy Longfield bed and breakfast that Sunday afternoon. Now, almost a decade later, Will is long since dead and Simon is comatose in a mental ward somewhere out in Connecticut. I'm the only one intact enough now to say what happened that warm, foggy evening. We stopped by a quaint bar at around 5 to taste the local drafts. We took our time flirting with the girls and singing the familiar songs that came on the jukebox, and when we were done, we decided to see what the nearby woods had to show us. We paid our tab, gathered our things, and made for the tree. As in the distance, once in the thick of nature, we could feel the peacefulness all around us. The smell and the sound of pure, unmolested life everywhere was intoxicating. We hiked until it was dark. Then we dug our flashlights out from our backpacks and pressed on a little more. The woods at night are magical, and we found ourselves grinning earnestly at each other as we walked. It was perhaps 10 in the evening when we decided we wanted to head back. Still not satisfied with our experience, however, we took a different route home. It wasn't long before we found a clearing that we must have missed on our first pass through the trees. It seemed unnaturally hewn from the surrounding forest, and we stopped to rest on the apparently man-made seats that were there. Simon was he first to see the strange man who emerged from the clearing. He had a large, bushy beard and wore the apparel of a man intimately familiar with nature. His eyes were sharp and knowledgeable. He stood silently and only said hello once we had all become aware of his presence. Hey, said, well, we all flashed each other a nervous look. The strange man exuded cunning and a measured calmness. These were unpleasant qualities to find in someone apparently wandering through the deep, dark woods. Do you believe in God? The strange man asked with a pleasant smile. We all remained silent, so the man replied, of course you do. Look, we've got to go, I said, beginning to stand and collect my things. I wanted to tea away, and I felt the sentiment was shared by Simon and Wilt. Surely then, the man continued, without acknowledging my words, you believe that everything God makes is beautiful. He approached the three of us with an excited stride as he said these things. He put his hands on my shoulders and pressed until I was forced to sit again. Will, Simon, and I looked to each other furtively, silently, deliberating on whether to attack this man, to knock him down and run away. But the man had not done anything to warrant such aggression, at least not yet. So we stayed. The man continued speaking. I'd like to share some of God's beauty with you all, he said. Then, from his coat, he produced a tin drinking flask. We all smiled with relief. Surely this strange man was just a friendly, white drunkard. He offered me the flask, and after looking to Will and Simon for encouragement, I drank. We passed it around, and the strange man simply smiled with good-natured glee. He seemed so pleased, in fact, just to be sharing with us. When we were done, the man took back his flask and returned it to his coat pocket. Then he clapped his hands together noisily, as a child does when it cannot contain its excitement, and said with an enthused smile, now we're ready for what I asked. My cheeks were flushing with the warmth of the drink we had shared. Indeed, as I looked around, Simon and Will's faces were already quite pink. We didn't drink that much, I thought to myself. Why did we all seem so affected? The strange man cleared his throat and said, we're ready, of course, to witness the beauty of God. He raised his voice until it was loud enough to produce a soft echo as he said it. With that, we became aware of a rustling in the nearby trees. What emerged were two bearded, scruffy men, not dissimilar in stance or dress from our stranger, in tow they dragged a bound woman. The sudden horror struck the three of us in different ways. Simon stood as if preparing to fight, while Will seemed ready to sprint away into the woods. I simply cry, "What the hell is this?" The strange man smiled as the woman and was brought closer. She wept pitifully, and we could hear her even through the cloth that was stuffed in her mouth. Again the strange man cleared his throat. "Everything God makes is beautiful. Humans, made I in his image, are the most beautiful of all. Tonight we witness the beauty of his creation." The woman looked up at our shocked faces. She was pleading for help. My instincts told me to take a tie-in, but I found my vision suddenly foggy and my other senses increasingly dulled. "What did we drink?" asked Simon. The strange man just smiled. The strength began to leave my muscles, and I sat back down. The bound girl gasped in desperation as she realized that we had been drugged. We were all utterly powerless to stop whatever was about to happen. Simon collapsed back into high seat as I had. Will stayed standing, wavering on his feet and looking down at the bound woman. I suddenly became aware that I recognized the girl's face. She was in the bar. Earlier, I had sent a beer to her table, and she had smiled and waved at me when it arrived. She looked so lovely just a few hours ago. Now she just looked frightened. As the panic began to take root, in my mind, I had to close my eyes to keep from vomiting. It was when the strange man drew a knife from his coat that Will tried to run for help. He did his best to sprint away, but his legs wobbled, and he fell before reaching the trees that marked the boundaries of the clearing. The strange man approached his collapsed form at a leisurely pace, and I watched him kneel over Will's body in the grass. The strange man pulled Will's face off of the ground and drew the knife across his neck with terrible indifference. He returned with the same slow gait as before, stopping only to wipe the blood on the grass. The girl didn't see Will die. Her eyes were closed as she worked to control her panicked breaths. Simon and I, however, did see it. I began to weep, and Simon only stared for a minute or two before vomiting into his lap. "We won't hurt you if you don't try to escape," the strange man said to the two of us with a kind smile. "You two will survive if you cooperate." The girl and I kept crying, but when I looked over to Simon, he was expressionless. Looking back, I'm not sure if that wasn't the moment his mind began to break. All this time, the two associates of the strange man remained standing like statues. Now they hoisted the girl to her knees. The strange man kneeled to look directly into her scared face and said, "There is so much complexity in you. You are the greatest work of art there is." Then he drove his knife into her belly. Simon vomited again, and I squeezed my eyes tightly closed. I could hear the woman gasping in pain through the gag, and her crying between screams was heart-wrenching in its helplessness. After perhaps a minute, one of the strange man's associates saw that I was closing my eyes and came over to where I sat. I felt him strike me across the face with his half-closed fist. When I still refused to witness the slaughter, I felt his hand close around my throat. "Watch or we'll cut you up next," he said. So I opened my eyes. By now the girl was almost dead. I can't be sure, but I think she was watching my face when she finally bled out. The way her expression softened as her focus finally came to rest on me will never leave my memory. I looked over at Simon, who still seemed to just be staring at something far, far away. His mind was gone by this point, I'm sure. I almost envy him. Look, said the strange man. He was pulling her insides out and holding them up for his associates and us to see. When he held her entrails close to my face, I could smell her viscera all around me. Finally, I puked. The strange man frowned and offered the pile of guts to Simon. Simon just continued to stare, which seemed at least to set the strange man's desire for a participating audience. I trust you to have learned a lesson about the beauty that God has put in everything, he said loudly with just a hint of disappointment. The tone was like that of a teacher speaking to hopelessly disinterested students. Now, it's time for the final step. It was then I noticed that the two associates of the strange man were building a fire. There is nothing more offensive to God than wasting the gifts he gives us. The strange man said the drug you've been given might be making you feel drowsy at this point, but rest assured, we will make sure you participate whether you're awake or not. My last memory before passing out was watching the men hoist the girl's form onto a roaring fire. The way they moved her was unceremonious and rough. Simon fell asleep before I did, and when we awoke at dawn there was no trace of the men at all. There were only the ashes of a large fire and the two of us. The men had taken Will's body and nothing that was left of the girl. They left us, I presume, to learn our lesson about God and beauty. I hoisted Simon over my shoulder and brought him back into town. It was hard going through the trees, but my adrenaline helped. An ambulance was immediately called for Simon, who was still a silent rag doll. I visited him once or twice in his hospital room since then. He only stares wordlessly at the far wall from his bed day after day. Sometimes he just starts crying. I tried to go to the police, but they were incredulous. No one ever reported the girl from the bar missing, or if someone did, it never reached Longfield. I guess she was from out of town, like us. I even brought the police back out to the woods where it all happened, but there was nothing there to indicate that my story was true. The cops all thought that Simon and I were just two druggies who had suffered a bad trip out in the woods. When I told them about Will, they formed a missing person search effort that lasted 2 weeks. Ultimately, everyone gave up. They told his grieving parents that he must have gotten lost in the woods. From there, they said, he probably became disoriented and injured himself. Fatally, no body was ever recovered. I'd like to tell myself it was all a fever dream. I'd like to think that the strange man just drugged us with something that gave Simon and me awful hallucinations. Maybe we really did wander out into the woods and got lost in some crevasse or ravine. I want to believe these things more than anything in the world, but I can't for one very specific reason. That morning when Simon and I awoke to find the strange man and his associates gone, I was sober. I'm sure of that. I was totally sober that horrible morning. And that sobriety means one thing. When I woke up and smacked my lips together for the first time, I wasn't imagining the taste of fresh human gore in my mouth. I've lived for years now with a pain in my stomach, which I thought was stress-related. I figure it was some kind of ulcer brought on by the trauma of what happened. It was only years later that an X-ray found the bit of human bone, and he wedged in my digestive tract. story for the dream of. Every dentist, you are here, said the man in the black suit, because you are dentists. The man in the black suit stood in a bright room before 10 men, 10 dentists in a semicircle. They didn't look at one another, they focused on the man in the black suit. Of all medical professions, continued the man, dentists have the highest rate of suicide. The men didn't move. They kept their eyes locked on the men talking to them. I have invited you here to talk about the man in the black suit. Paused. He looked down at his feet and shuffled them a bit. Then he looked up. I brought you here to talk about the dream. A few of the men fidgeted. One uncrossed his legs. They looked at one another. They looked sharply, squinty-eye, questioningly at the man in the black suit. The man in the black suit folded his arms and looked at each of them. He waited. Finally, one of the dentists spoke. You a dentist? No, said the man in the black suit. Then why should we talk to you? It won't do any good. You wouldn't understand, said another dentist, sitting up in his chair. You wouldn't understand unless you're a dentist, said another. You can't understand it, corrected another dentist. And even if you could understand our dream, said another, you wouldn't really understand it. Not really. The man in the black suit listened to them. He nodded as they spoke. The dentist looked at him with scrutiny. The man shuffled a bit and cleared his throat. Like I said, I brought you here to talk about the dream. He reached into his black suit and pulled out a bundle of envelopes. He opened one and showed it to the dentists in their seats. Each of these envelopes contains $5,000 cash. You each get an envelope if you'll agree to tell me about the dream. Why do you care? Asked a dentist. Is T. At your money, you a pharmacist? You gonna give us a pill? Some of the dentists snickered. What's in it for you? Why should we? Regardless of my reasons, interrupted the man in the black suit, I have a lot of money for each one of you if you will tell me the dream. The dentists sat in silence. Then they spoke and said more or less the same thing. You wouldn't understand. You couldn't understand. No, you couldn't understand. The room fell silent. Again, the man stayed standing in front of the dentist as they sat, arms folded in front of him. Finally, one of them spoke. Heck, he said, getting to his feet. I'll tell him. It won't matter, said another dentist. He won't get it. Nobody does, unless you're a dentist, and he's already told us he has not. So what do we have to lose? Replied the other one. I'll tell him the dream. We'll get our cash, and we'll be on our way. Except for the few heads that nodded in agreement, the room stayed hasty-eye lines. So, said the willing one, here's the dream. Excuse me, interrupted the man in the black suit, putting up his hand. Before you begin, I ask that this be recorded. The man in the black suit clapped his hands twice loudly. A door opened from the back corner of the room, and an old woman entered, pushing some sort of typewriter on a chair with squeaky wheels. This is Ms. Crumb, smiled the man as the woman approached. She is a record keeper, he said. That, said the man, pointing at the machine on the chair, is a stenograph. Ms. Crumb will take notes. The old woman slowly made her way to the front of the semicircle. The man in the black suit took the stenograph off the chair, and Ms. Crumb sat down. He placed the stenograph with its large blocky keys on her lap. She shifted a few times and got comfortable. Then she looked up at the man in the black suit expectantly. Okay, smiled the man in the black suit. If you are all in the agreement, That's began. The willing dentist stood up. He cleared his throat. The dream has to do with the amount of holes in a person's head, he began. One of the dentists sighed loudly as if he heard the story 1,000 times. He's not going to understand, he retorted. Let him try, said another. The first dentist continued. Every person has 7 holes in their head. 2 ear holes, he said, putting his index fingers on his ears. 2 eye holes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth, he said. 7. Miss Crum started typing quietly away on her stenograph. It's a horrible dream, really, he continued. The dream deals with a type of weaving that goes in and out of these different holes, and it's always the same. The dentist lifted his hand and put his thumb and forefinger tog ether as if he were pinching something. I am standing over a patient with a needle and a piece of thread. I have an overwhelming need to. The man squinted up his face like he didn't want to say the next part, but he did. I have an overwhelming urge to weave that needle and that thread through those 7 holes. I put the end of it in an ear, and it must come out of another hole, say the mouth. Then it must go into another hole and out another and in another and out another until the last one. The dentist paused. Am I right so far? Fellows, right, said one dentist. You got it, said another. But the man continued, because there are 7 holes in the head, 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth. The needle and thread always end up on the inside, and the head, it's in and out, in and out, in and out, and in, and that's a problem? Asked the man in the suit. See, someone said he doesn't get it. It's a huge problem, continued the dentist. There is something in the dream, an aura, or an entity, a compulsion, call it what you want, that mandates. What goes in must come out, so there. I am bent over some man, sewing a thread through him like he's a stuffed turkey. He scrunched up his face again like he knew he'd said something distasteful. It's hard to capture in words, one of the other dentists interrupted. But the dream is very clear, and there is a very real sense of some sort of urgency. I take that needle and that thread, and I must go in through one of the holes in the head and out through another, until they're all used, and every time, he continued, gritting his teeth, that dang needle ends up on the inside. So I pull it out, and the patient is screaming, and I start again, and I'm up to my elbows in blood, and you can imagine, another dentist interrupted. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrible, said another. It's exhausting, said another. Completely exhausting. And, of course, it makes perfect sense when we're awake, said another, that the needle and thread will always end up on the inside of the SK. Oh, but we do it over and over and over because it's a dream, going in and out, in and out, in and out, and then the patient screams, and you gotta pull the needle and thread out, and you're up to your elbows in screaming and blood. And because it's a dream, you just start again and again and again. What goes in must come out, whispered one of the dentists. In and out, in and out, in and out, and then, said another. The man in the black suit listened intently, nodding. Miss Crum sat silently, recording every word. Then, said another dentist, we wake up after a full night of needling and threading and go to work, and there is a patient in the chair, and the only thing on our minds is that dream. After a while, it is pretty dang hard to determine what is a dream and what isn't. It's why we drill so hard sometimes. Said another, we think, if I can drill another hole in that tooth, in that head, then maybe, just maybe, I can dream of a patient with another hole in the head, and maybe the needle will come out, and maybe the dream will stop, said another. And, said another dentist resolutely, it's most definitely why some of us put a gun in our own mouths and pull the trigger. He looked around the room. Nobody looked at him as he finished. It's a bad thing to say, but that hole in our own head is the only sure way to end the dream. The man in the black suit listened. The room fell quiet. Then we can sleep, said one. Yes, someone exhaled. Sleep. That's the story, said one of the dentists. He looked at the man in the black suit. We just want to sleep. At this point, the man in the black suit got up from his chair and approached Ms. Crum, who had been recording every word on the stenograph. He stood directly behind her, so the two of them faced the semicircle of dentists. He placed his hands on her shoulders. She stopped typing. I would like all of you to come forward and stand around Ms. Crum, said the man in the black suit. Go ahead, come forward. The dentist got up. They approached Ms. Crum and the man in the black suit. He looked down onto the top of her head and said, Ms. Crum, I want you to show these people your unique characteristic. Ms. Crum slowly lifted her chin and tilted her head back until she locked eyes with the man standing above her. He gently placed his hands around the bottom of her chin and snugly cradled the top of her head with his forearms into his stomach. The man in the black suit looked up at one of the dentists. Come here, he said kindly. Come see. A dentist stepped closer and stared down at the old stenographer's face. He gasped. What is that? He asked. He moved even closer until he was just a foot or so from Ms. Crum's face. He squinted and fumbled with his words. Why, how is it done? He lifted a pointing finger at the old woman's face. That is impossible. The man in the black suit looked up at the rest of the dentists, looked closely. He said, all of you. Ms. Crum remained in the man's grip, staring up at the ceiling. As they came forward, she resumed her typing, recording the dentists as they came one by one until they had all witnessed for themselves the miracle of Ms. Crum. She has no mouth, said one. It's just a line, said another, pointing with a pinky finger. Just a fake line. She has 6 holes in her head, said another with a half smile. No mouth, they all exulted. No mouth, they cheered. In and out, in and out, in and out, said one, pinching his fingers with an imaginary needle hand thread. In and out, his hand went down and up, in and out, in and out. That means, said another. Another finished his sentence. What goes in must come out. In and out, in and out, in and out. The dentists cheered. They smiled, wide-eyed, and patted each other on the back and looked at the man in the black suit. The man in the black suit gently released Ms. Crum from his grip, and she dutifully continued to record each statement, each observation, as the dentist walked around the chair, counting the holes in her ears, her eyes, her nostrils. Some counted the holes with their fingers. Others pinched their own imaginary needles, plunging and pulling imaginary threads into the air as they Washington looked around her. Some became emotional. She doesn't have an extra hole, said one. She has one fewer. It makes sense. The man in the black suit eared his throat. They all looked up at him. "She was created for you," smiled the man in the black suit, "so you could sleep." "Thank you," they cried to the man in the suit. Th. In turn, bent down next to Miss Crumb. "Thank you, Miss Crumb," they said. "Sincerely, thank you for existing," they said. "Thank you for helping us sleep. I am ready to hand out some envelopes," said the man in the black suit, reaching into his suit coat, retrieving the bundles. "But first," he said, pulling a needle and a long piece of black thread from his coat pocket, "let us make sure it works." Story 5. Kistlick Syndrome. The first known case of Kistlick Syndrome occurred in Bonn, Germany on June 27, 2014. The media was all over it, of course, due to the grisly and disturbing nature of the event, but stayed with the story due to the unraveling strangeness that emerged as more details emerged. On that day, police initially responded to a report that a mob of people had attacked and seriously injured a person on a side street in a shopping district. When first responders arrived on the scene, they were shocked at what they found. Over a dozen people scattered around a wide sidewalk in various stages of shock. They were all covered in blood and gore, covering their shirts, arms, face, and especially on their hands and around their mouths. Some of them hair weeping opalate, some were catatonic, and a couple appeared to be trying to induce vomiting by sticking their fingers down their throats. However, this was not the most unsettling aspect of the scene. Lying roughly near the center of the assembled group was a human corpse, though this wasn't immediately obvious. The corpse was in tatters, with its chest cavity torn open, most of the face shredded, and several limbs mangled and broken, with the right arm actually having been separated from the rest of the body and dragged several yards away. The most disturbing aspect of the victim, however, was the nature of the wounds. Cursory inspection revealed that most of the wounds to the body had been inflicted by human teeth. Several eyewitnesses would later recount the same story to the police. The victim had been walking down the street, doing nothing out of the ordinary, when he stopped to check a bus schedule. It was then that several people passing by him had suddenly stopped and turned their attention to the man, who seemed oblivious to the sudden attention. A few moments later, witness claimed that the passers-by leapt at the man, knocking him down and tearing at him with teeth and fingernails. The attackers made animalistic grunts as they rent the man asunder, some tearing flesh free with their teeth and eating it, while others shoved large handfuls of organs into their mouths and devoured them. By far the most disturbing aspect was the account of several patrons of a shoe store directly across from the site of the attack. One person had left a nearby shop, screaming and brandishing a long pipe at the attackers to drive them off. But when he got within a couple of yards of the attack, he suddenly came to a halt, as if dazed. Several seconds later, he had dropped the weapon and joined the attackers in their savage dismemberment of the man. What startled the police most, however, was the behavior of the attackers after the attack. After the attack had been going on for over a minute, the attackers suddenly stopped. Some witnesses described it as though they appeared to be coming to their senses, and then they began screaming. Many of them scrambled away from the body, retching, while others simply fell back and went catatonic. One attacker, an elderly woman, lost consciousness and would later pass away from heart failure. The police rounded up all the attackers and carted them off to the police station. Several hours of interrogation and background investigation would only deepen the mystery. The people were all complete strangers, unrelated by any factors other than their proximity to the victims when the attack occurred. They were mostly coherent now, and as coherent as you could expect given their circumstances. Most showed deep revulsion what they had done, but couldn't adequately explain what had happened, only that they had been overcome by an uncontrollable urge to attack and devour the man, and how his flesh had tasted delicious to them, right up to the point when they had regained control of themselves. This led to the investigators nicknaming it Kisslick syndrome, after the German word for delicious. Eventually, they were all quietly sent to mental health institutions for treatment of their temporary psychosis. News organizations speculated wildly about the attack, a thrill-kill gang, a secret cult of cannibals, a viral marketing stunt for a new zombie movie, and other theories floated around for most of the following weeks, right up to the second attack. This attack occurred in a small village in China, this time involving several people in a street market attacking and devouring a vendor whose stall they'd been near. The same pattern was described, the people suddenly freezing before attacking the man, the same gory attack, and the same sudden cessation of hostilities followed by horror on the part of the attackers. The government media was quick to cover up the attack, though stories of it managed to leak out through the usual internet channels. By now, several multinational agencies had become involved, looking for a pattern in the attacks, the main suspect being some heretofore unknown religious cult or gruesome drug cartel. It wasn't until the third attack, 10 days later, that the true nature of the attacks would start to be uncovered. The third recorded incident occurred in London, in a heavily monitored portion of the downtown area. The footage of the attack, which eventually leaked out to the internet, showed the same pattern of attack as the previous two incidents, though this time a string of events would shed further light on the true nature. Incidents. The attack occurred along a busy street, and this time the victim, a young man in excellent physical health, managed to break free of his attackers and run out into the street. His attackers pursued him, but the man and those following closest were struck by a bus as they entered a bus lane. Those behind them pulled up moments after the bus struck and dragged their intended victim several yards down the road, and this seemed to cause whatever had come over them to release its hold, and they seemed to regain their senses, though they were clearly in a state of shock. The young man himself was apparently killed the moment the bus struck him. This footage and a subsequent autopsy would lead to the discovery of the horrific truth behind the incidents. An autopsy of the body, complete with chemical analysis, showed an unknown chemical in the body of the young man. This chemical was present throughout the body, but mostly in the blood and on the skin of the deceased. This chemical was determined to be a previously unknown aromatic hydrocarbon compound that had been produced by his body's own glandular system. This chemical would then begin to waft off the person, become airborne, and would enter surrounding people through the mucous membranes of the nose and mouth, finally accumulating in the olfactory and cranial nerves. When present at a high enough concentration, the hydrocarbons would begin causing something akin to a short circuit in those nerves. What followed was a cascade of neurological reactions would then supercharge the part of the brain associated with hunger, quickly overwhelming the conscious mind, banishing higher thought, and causing them to go into an animalistic state where they needed to devour the source of the smell. The hydrocarbon itself was unstable, and once it came in contact with air, it would begin to break down. This was what had limited the radius of the attackers. It also explained why they had ceased their attack after the death of the victim, as exposing the inner workings of the body would expose the chemical to air without any source of replenishment, causing it to disperse and release its hold. The chemical had only been detectable in the accident victim due to the circumstances of his demise. By the time stunned onlookers had rushed to aid him, he had already passed away. The chemical present in his spilled blood and on his skin had diminished enough to not affect those who approached the body. However, with the cessation of vital functions caused not be why consumption of said organs by other humans, enough tissue to sample was still present and find traces of the chemical. Needless to say, the governments of the world worked quickly to keep his findings under wraps. They began looking for a source of the change in the glandular system. Bioterrorism was suspected, and across the globe, intelligence agencies worked overtime to try and find any signs the disease had been manufactured by the usual rogues gallery. Researchers worked feverishly to try and find a food or airborne vector, but to little avail. The incidents continued to occur, but did not accelerate in frequency, nor did a geographic common point emerge. It wasn't until late 2015 that the answer emerged. In early 2014, astronomers had begun to register an unusual subatomic particle burst originating from deep space. They had no clear source and were not particularly plentiful, but it did make some news for its quirkiness about how little we understood about subatomic particles. Researchers continued to gather data on these particles, but in September 2015, a Spanish government researcher noticed a correlation between these bursts and the attacks, with H bursts being recorded in the general area the victims had been in hours before the attack. Studies would reveal that these particles, passing through the human brain, would spark the process to alter the human glandular system. This information led to a flurry of activity from the governments of the world. They announced to the world the existence of Kisleck syndrome and its cause in February 2016 and assured the citizens of the world they were working on a solution. Till then, they advised people to wear air filtering devices when going around in public and to wear newly designed devices that would detect when your body began to emit the hydrocarbons so you could make your way to a hospital for isolation. But this was where the problems began. It soon became clear, thanks to tests on victims who managed to reach isolation before it was too late, that the alterations in their glandular would not be reversed without causing fatal reactions in the human body. Furthermore, the high-energy particles turned out to be impossible to block without extremely expensive and difficult to produce materials. Several years of fruitless experimentation TNT changed these two factors, and the burst showed no signs of stopping. Some people suggested developing the particle detection system further, but it finally decided that it wasn't worth it, since knowing it had occurred was akin to closing the barn door after the horses had gotten out. One of the few pieces of good news was they also didn't show any signs of increasing either. Meanwhile, governments had begun to enact mandatory respirator laws in order to prevent attacks, but these were met with surprising resistance. After all, the chances of a given person being exposed to a person experiencing the peak of Kistlick syndrome were very slim, less than 1% of 1% of 1% for a given person's lifetime, less than the odds of being struck by lightning, one famous statistician showed, and so the laws were eventually repealed, replaced at first with campaigns urging citizens to wear them, until these were eventually defunded. Furthermore, it was argued that it was unjust to punish those who had perpetrated these attacks, since they had been overwhelmed by the foreign chemical in their body and couldn't resist. Soon, laws began to SBR-ing up, making Kistlick syndrome an acceptable defense in court, and the attackers would often receive government aid in order to help them recover from the trauma of the attack. That was all years ago, and here in 2037, we don't really think too much about it. It's like getting struck by a car or attacked by a wild animal. It's just something that can happen. Oh, we have taken steps as a society to deal with it. Young children are taught about the condition in health class at a young age in order to ingrain in them the necessary tools to avoid being traumatized by it. It teaches them what the sensation of hunger would be like, and that, scientifically, it's no different than eating raw meat. These programs, in place since 2020, have been designed by experts and have been largely effective at helping avoid long-term psychological damage. It's not something they can control after all. We don't even really monitor to the bursts anymore, just some spot checks to confirm. And they are still occurring. It was just last week, however, that news has begun to circulate around the internet about an attack in New York City. A pair of teens attacked a homeless man in an alley and devoured much of his body. They had passed lie detector tests that they had been overcome by a tremendous urge to eat him, and that he looked delicious. However, enough was left for a Kistlick compound test. Apparently, no sign of the syndrome was found in his body. Attacks have been higher this year, actually. And it turns out most of the attackers have been teenagers or younger, all of whom have, he stated, that they were gripped by an overwhelming urge that someone simply looked delicious. Story 6, The Shoebox. I've decided to share this here because honestly I feel like I need to talk about this before I go crazy, and this is probably the only place where I could talk about this and not have people think that I'm crazy. My name is Elizabeth Black. I've lived in New York, PR, pretty much most of my life without really having anything strange happen to me. Never seen a ghost, never saw a UFO, and no, before you ask, never bumped into a tall, pale, faceless guy with nice taste in suits. Me and my girlfriend Joan have lived in the same apartment for the past 7 years without having anything bizarre or unusual happen to either of us. And I guess that's still the case now, 'cause this story isn't really about what happened to me. This story is about what happened to my brother Alan. This all happened last Christmas when he'd come over to visit. It had been really nice. My girlfriend is an amazing cook, and she made the most delicious turkey I think I've ever tasted. We played party games, watched Disney films, and cheesy Christmas specials on the TV. Tuned into the Doctor Who Christmas special too, as we're both long-time SCIF nuts. Howlin' was a dick and teased us about it, but a well-aimed cushion to the head got him to stop being a jerk. All in all, it was a pretty great Christmas day. The presents were wonderful, including certain special presents my very own naughty Mrs. Claus at me that I was very glad my brother didn't see, and we all enjoyed ourselves so much, but eventually it came time for Alan to head on home, and so a few days later we headed down to where he was going to get his train. I went with him, and we made small talk, chat, about little, inconsequential things. I asked what his plans for the new year were. He asked how my job was going. You know, that kind of thing. While we were waiting for his train, though, the tease when we both noticed something that was kind of odd. There was a man sat on one of the chairs in the train station, not too far away from us. He was dressed in a neat black suit, red tie, black gloves, and a pair of sunglasses, despite the fact that it definitely was not the kind of weather you need those in. He had a small smile on his face as he rocked back and forth on the seat, singing to himself softly. I recognized the song as unforgettable, and he would hum bits of it, then sing a few words before going back to humming away. And on his lap was a shoe box. What do you think's inside? Alan asked after a while, obviously having noticed that I was staring as well. I shrugged. Choose, I guess. I replied. He laughed. Come on, W. Here's your imagination. Don't you want to be a big fancy writer one day? You can come up with something better than that, he said with a grin. Okay, it's a collection of severed hands. He's a serial killer prowling the train station, waiting to harvest them from unsuspecting victims, I suggested. Nice, okay. So why? Alan prodded, urging me on. I thought for a moment before continuing. Former hand model, his own were burned in a freak grease fire, which is why he wears the gloves. It drove him mad and left him with a deep-seated loathing of all those blasted with and scarred hands. And now he takes a terrible vengeance upon them all, I said, feeling rather proud of that little bit of nonsense. My brother giggled loudly, clearly amused. Nah, it's a dragon, he said. A dragon in New York? I asked, and he nodded eagerly. He's a hunter and trader of rare and mythical beasts. He goes to the furthest corners of the earth, seeking out creatures most done to even believe they exist, bringing them back to sell to eccentric private collectors all over the world, he said as I shook my head in amusement. You've been reading too much Harry Potter, you dork, I said. And then I noticed Alan had stopped smiling and was looking at something behind me. Turning, I saw that the man was stood beside me now, smiling down at me pleasantly, the box still clutched in his hand. Good afternoon. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, he said, in a polite voice, with what sounded like a slight Australian accent. I was honestly so surprised to just see I am standing there that the apology I attempted just became a rather stupid-sounding series of noises and mumbled half-formed words. He certainly didn't seem threatening or angry, but turning around to see him had been a shock, and that, coupled with the embarrassment of realizing he'd heard our conversation, made me have what my girlfriend likes to refer to as one of my blonde moments. Please, no need to feel embarrassed. I thought it was very amusing. I simply wished to ask if either of you would like to see what is in the box, he continued. Alan leaned forward, clearly intrigued, head reaching for the box only for the man to move it out of reach of his hands, taking a step back, his expression never changing. Not here, please. Follow me, he said, before walking off, not even bothering to look back to see if we were walking after him. Alan stood to follow, and I reached out, grabbing hold of his arm to stop him. I don't know why. After all, the man certainly seemed recklessly nice, and it's not like my brother was a child. But something about this just seemed way too weird to me. Blame watching too many horror movies or just the news, because living in New York you heard plenty of stories about terrible things happening, and just because the guy seemed nice didn't mean he wasn't some kind of weirdo. Come on, you know your IOUs, Alan said, tugging free of my grip and heading around the corner after the man. With a sigh I decided to follow, seeing that he'd come to a stop outside one of the public toilets. Please, step inside and I shall show you, the man said, before entering, the door closing behind him. At this point, any apprehension I'd had pretty much triple, because this had gone from weird to creepy. Outside of porn, I didn't know many scenarios where following weird-looking strangers into grimy public toilets ever ended well. But my brother, genius that he was already starting to head towards the door before I grabbed him. Are you crazy? Seriously? Best case scenario, this guy is a rapist. Worst case, he's some kind of serial killer who's planning to make you into a skin suit. I growled angrily at him, but he swatted my hand aside, laughing off my concerns. Please, did you see him? The guy looks like a gentle breeze could snap him in two. I've been boxing sync. College, and you've got that freaky upper body strength. Between the two of us, we could mash him into paste in about 5 seconds if he tried anything, he said. I had to admit he did have a point. The man in black certainly didn't seem like much of a threat, and even if he had some kind of weapon in the box, it wouldn't take much to take him down before he got the chance to use it. Still, I wasn't about to let my brother put himself into harm's way, all to find out what was in some stupid shoebox. And oh, besides, what does it matter anyway? It's not like he's going to have something that can turn lead into gold or tell your future in there. He's just some weird, creepy guy who's probably got a dead cat in there or something. I snapped. Alan sighed, probably realizing that he wasn't going to be getting his way, and nodded. Then he jerked his head to the side, the look of shock on his face. Hey, how the hell did he get over there? He asked, and like an idiot I turned to look, to see nothing. And the second my eyes were off him, he'd bolted through the door before I could stop him. To this day I feel like such a moron for fooling for a trick as cliched as, hey, look behind you. But I didn't have time to kick myself at that moment. Moving quickly, I went to the door of the restroom, pushing hard on it, ready in case anything was wrong. And the door didn't budge. I took a step back, feeling seriously afraid now. Before shoving harder on the door, nothing. I took a few steps back and took a running kick at it. The door didn't even seem to register the blow at all. Desperate, now I started to hammer on the door, calling my brother's name, asking if he was all right, my fist beating against the hard material, feeling fear flooding my body. And then the screaming began. I can't put into words how awful it was. Those screams, I sometimes hear them in my dreams. And when I do, I wake up, sweating, shivering, feeling sick to my stomach. These weren't just screams of pain or of fear. I honestly can't really describe how it felt to listen to them, not properly. I've never heard screams like those, not in real life or in the movies, and the Washington. Why they made me feel at that moment, it was just horrible. I guess the only way to try and give you an idea of how I felt is like this. You know when you're watching a movie and the music gets real tense, and you get that feeling in your gut where you know something terrible is about to happen. That kind of sick apprehension. That's how this felt 100 times over when the door finally opened, finally yielded to me shoving against it. I stumbled inside. No idea what I might see. My brother was crouched on the floor. He was fully clothed, uninjured, and staring just straight, staring at the ground, and he was alone. I ran to him, not caring at first where the man had gone. Wrapping my arms round him as he shook in my grip, I held him tight like I had done when we were kids, and he'd had a nightmare, just wanting to make sure he was all right. He was damp with sweat, and his eyes were bloodshot, wide and staring and bloodshot. The expression on his face was of absolute horror. I can't remember ever seeing him afraid like he was in that moment. There was no sign of the man anywhere in the room. I called first the police, then my girlfriend, and stood there beside my brother as we waited for them to arrive. The police took statements and a description of the man. I left out the part where he'd vanished because, honestly, as if they would ever talk me seriously if I told them that. I just said he'd slipped past me while I'd been concerned over keeping Alan safe. To this day, he's never been found. The doctors checked Alan out and found no signs of injury or assault. He seemed to be perfectly fine, except that he didn't seem to remember a thing about what had happened from the moment he followed the man to the moment I came in after him. It was just one big blank. Both I and Joan have suggested that he talk to therapists now and then, but he always refused. I don't think he wants to remember what happened that day, and I can't really say that I blame him. I'm not sure I want to know what happened either. Maybe there's some things that it's better to forget, some things that people just shouldn't have to live with the memory of. There are things that I wish I could forget about that day as well. The look on my brother's face, the feel of him quivering in my arms in sheer terror, and the sound of those screams. Sometimes I want to tell someone, my girlfriend, my mother, someone, what it is about the memory of those screams that upsets me so much. Because it isn't just how they sounded, terrible as it was. It's the fact that even though Alan and the smiling man in the suit were the only ones in that room, it sounded like hundreds, thousands of people were all screaming at once. Story 7. Smile Dog. I first met in person with Mary in the summer of 2007. I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer gathering information for a few early college assignments, and, if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on unrelated business, but at the last moment Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For half an hour I sat with Terence as we camped outside the bedroom door, I listening and taking notes, while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense, but fit with the pattern I.W. as expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary was the sysup for a small, Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile.jpg, and her life changed forever. She and Terence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she is the only one who has spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous or are perhaps dead. In 2005, when I was only in 10th grade, Smile JPG was first brought to my attention by my burgeoning interest in web-based phenomena. Mary was the most often cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as Smile.dog. The being Smile JPG is reputed to display what caught my interest, other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity toward such things, was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists other than as a rumor or hoax. It is unique because, though the entire phenomenon centers on a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up with the most frequency on sites such as the image board for Han, particularly the X-focused paranormal subreddit. It is suspected these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile.jpg is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. This purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like Smile.jpg is regarded with such disdain, since it is patently absurd, though depending on whom you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge Smile.jpg single quotes as existence might be just as much out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile.jpg nor Smile.dog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such other, perhaps more scandalous shock sites as opening parenthesis hello.jpg or Two Girls One Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile.jpg is summarily deleted by any of the encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legend. Mary's story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up high in the early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale that in 2000 a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website something awful with a deluge of smile.dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s, that smile.jpg circulated on Usenet and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject line, "Smile. God loves you, yet, despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile JPG often weakly joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo. A dog-like creature usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of the camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim to have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split in a wide grin, revealing to rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, very human-looking teeth. This is, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their minds during the time they are, in reality, having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminably often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though in some cases it is more effective than others. Mary, I assume, was not on effective medication. That was why after my visit to her apartment in 2007 I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the name of a supposed victim of Smile.jpg who felt more interested in talking about his experiences. For a time nothing happened, and at length I forgot completely about my pursuits, since I had begun my freshman year of college. And was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008, added by Moose Juice to jml****.com from Mari@****.net last summer's interview. You dear Mr. L., I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer. When you came to interview me, I hope you understand that it was no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realized that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time I was afraid. You see, for 15 years I have been haunted by Smile.jpg. Smile.dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it is true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any all dreams I have ever had. I do not move and do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile. Dog, it talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I am not quite sure what it really is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word, That is how it phrases its demands, and I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in the mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3.5-inch floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a co-worker. I could even show it to Terence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile.dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet if it lied, what would I do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things every night for 15 years. Smile.dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years I have stood strong, though there have been hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board where I first encountered Smile JPG stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They are the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, Mr. L. But last summer, when you contacted me and my husband about an interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile.dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with, and I thought I would not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing was plotting to ruin your life. I could not stand the thought, and in fact I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L., and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more depraved, someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile.dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Mary E. Terence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself while cleaning up the various things she'd left behind, closing email accounts, and the like. He happened upon the above message. He was a man and in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette. He revealed and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that most disturbed him, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted, like some sort of animal. He said, I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with the couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that, for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world has odd ways of testing us. Almost a full year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary, I received another email to jml@***.com from Elzahir8 to ****.com. Smile. Hello, I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you were interested in Smile Dog. I have sought it is not as bad as every one says. I have sent it to you here. Just spreading the word, the final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was one file attachment called nat Urally smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was mostly likely a fake, I imagined, and even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of smile.jpg single quotes as peculiar powers. Ye's account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyway. After all, how could a simple image do what smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, and if why turned out to be correct, if smile.dog came to me in my dreams demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I die, or would I simply spread the word, eager to be put to rest? And if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about smile.jpg, I decided I could attach it as evidence, and anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest, would be affected. And even assuming the smile.jpg attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes, I could.